I did not know the door was locked until I tried to open it. The handle would not move. Behind me, the waitress smiled and said, almost joking, "Promise you will not pass out." Everyone laughed. My face burned. My hands were shaking. I had come in hungry and left humiliated, dizzy, and trapped like a joke they were all enjoying. What none of them knew was this: that moment did not break me. It marked them. Because weeks later, when the truth came out, that same laughter turned into silence. My name is Emily Carter, and I was 32 years old when I learned how quickly dignity can be taken from someone who already feels invisible. I had never thought of myself as fragile. I worked 2 jobs, lived alone in a narrow apartment above a shuttered tailor shop, and carried a life that never seemed to slow down long enough for me to catch my breath. Most days I moved on routine. Wake up, work, commute, smile when expected, stay quiet when overlooked. I learned early that drawing attention to myself rarely led to kindness. That afternoon, I had just finished a 10-hour shift at the medical clinic. My feet ached. My shoulders burned. I had skipped lunch because one patient emergency bled into another, and by the time I clocked out, my hands were trembling from hunger. I told myself I would stop somewhere simple and familiar. It's just food, just quiet, nothing that required effort. The diner sat on the corner of a busy road, its neon sign flickering like it struggled to stay alive. I had eaten there before. Nothing special. Plastic menus, sticky tables, the kind of place where nobody remembered your name and anonymity felt like protection. I pushed the door open and the smell of grease and burnt coffee wrapped around me. My stomach tightened, hopeful and weak at the same time. That was when I noticed her. The waitress stood behind the counter, laughing with 2 men in pressed suits. She looked late 20s, hair pulled back too tight, eyeliner sharp and deliberate. When her eyes landed on me, her smile did not disappear. It shifted, it thinned. Like she had already formed an opinion without hearing a single word. I slid into a booth near the window and sat carefully. The vinyl seat squealed under my weight. I pretended not to notice the way her gaze dropped and lifted again. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was tired. Hunger makes people paranoid, I thought. Do not create problems where there are none. She took her time bringing the menu. When she did, she dropped it onto the table instead of handing it to me. No greeting, no eye contact. Just a quick look at my face, then my hands, then my stomach. Something unreadable passed through her expression. I ordered soup and bread. Simple, inexpensive, warm. She raised an eyebrow, lips curling slightly as she paused too long before writing anything down. From the counter, I heard laughter again. I heard my order repeated in an exaggerated tone, followed by a snicker that landed like a slap. My shoulders tightened. I stared down at the table, tracing scratches in the fake wood with my eyes. The wait stretched longer than it should have. Each minute dragged heavy and uncomfortable. When the food finally arrived, she set the bowl down hard enough that soup spilled onto the table. She did not apologize. She did not even slow down. She simply walked away. I told myself to eat. I told myself to ignore the tightness in my chest. But my hands were shaking now, worse than before. The room felt hotter, louder. I could feel eyes flicking toward me, then quickly away. The soup smelled comforting, but my appetite was dissolving, replaced by a creeping nausea. Halfway through the meal, I realized something was wrong. The edges of my vision blurred. The overhead lights burned too bright. I had felt this before, years ago, when my blood sugar dropped dangerously low. I reached into my bag for the glucose tablets I usually carried. They were not there. I must have left them on the kitchen counter at home. I stood slowly, planning to ask for water and step outside for air. That was when her voice cut through the noise, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Careful," she said, smiling wide. "You look like you might pass out." Laughter rippled through the diner. My face burned. Heat rushed into my ears. I wanted to disappear, to shrink until I took up no space at all. I walked toward the door, focusing on each step. The handle did not move. For a moment, I thought I was mistaken. I tried again. Nothing. Then I heard the sharp click of the lock behind me. Her voice followed, playful and cruel at the same time. "Promise you will not pass out," she said. "I do not want a scene." Something inside me broke then, quietly, not in a way anyone else could see. Like a thread stretched too thin for too long, finally snapping. This was not an accident. This was not confusion. This was amusement. And as I stood there, trapped between a locked door and a room full of watching faces, I made a decision I did not yet fully understand. I would remember every laugh, every stare, every second, because moments like this never stay small. They grow, and sooner or later, they demand to be answered. If you have ever been made to feel small, humiliated, or trapped in a moment you did not deserve, pause for a second. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and stay with this story until the end. What happened to me in that diner started as a quiet act of cruelty, but it did not end quietly. This is a story about patience, memory, and justice that arrives when people least expect it. I wish I could say that moment ended when the door finally unlocked and I stepped outside, but cruelty rarely limits itself to a single scene. It lingers, it follows, and sometimes it waits for another opportunity to tighten its grip. The manager eventually came from the back, keys jingling, annoyance written across his face like I had inconvenienced him by existing. He unlocked the door without apology and waved me out as if shooing a stray animal. The waitress watched from behind the counter, arms crossed, lips pressed into a satisfied line. No one asked if I was all right. No one offered water. The laughter had faded, but the damage remained. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, breathing through the dizziness, forcing myself not to cry. Cars rushed past. Life continued at full speed. I felt like I had been paused, left behind in a moment that only I seemed to feel the weight of. I told myself to forget it, to move on. People like her thrived on reactions. I would not give her another second of my energy. That promise lasted exactly 3 days. I returned to the diner because it sat directly on my route home from work. I told myself it was practical. I told myself I would not let one incident dictate my movements. The bell above the door rang as I stepped inside, and the air seemed to change instantly. Her head snapped up. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by a slow smile that settled deep in my stomach like a stone. She did not come to my table for 10 minutes. When she finally did, she leaned one hand on the booth and looked down at me like she was bored already. Her voice carried just enough to be overheard. "Back again," she said. "Feeling brave today." My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice steady. I ordered water first this time. She laughed softly, wrote nothing down, and walked away. When the water arrived, it came in a cloudy glass with a chip on the rim. The ice had already melted. Around me, the diner hummed with conversation, forks scraping plates, coffee pouring, normal sounds, ordinary moments. But at my table, time dragged. She forgot my order, or pretended to. When I reminded her, she sighed loudly and rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath about people who should eat at home. That night, I left hungry again. The next visit was worse. She openly mocked me to her coworkers, her voice sharp and casual, like cruelty was a second language. I caught fragments as I passed the counter. Words like fragile, liability, drama, each one landed harder than the last. No one stopped her. No one told her to lower her voice. I started noticing things I had ignored before. How she watched certain customers and ignored others. How she smiled wide at men and sneered at women who looked tired, worn, or alone. How she positioned herself like a gatekeeper, deciding who deserved comfort and who deserved punishment. I told myself to stop going. I told myself I did not need that place. But something stubborn kept pulling me back. A part of me needed to understand why, needed to see if it would stop. It did not. One evening, as I stood to leave, she blocked my path with her tray. "Careful," she said again, repeating the word like a private joke. Would not want another episode. People nearby laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. Enough to remind me how easily discomfort becomes entertainment when it does not belong to you. That night, I cried in my car. And still, it escalated. I began noticing small changes. My receipt listed items I had not ordered. Extra charges, small amounts, easy to miss. When I pointed it out, she smiled sweetly and corrected it, always acting like I had made the mistake. Once, I found my credit card returned with a smear of something sticky across the strip. Another time, my napkin was damp, like it had been dipped in water before being set beside my plate. Each incident alone felt minor. Together they formed a pattern that made my chest tighten every time I saw that flickering neon sign. The worst part was the way she watched me. Not constantly, not obviously, just enough. Like she was waiting for something, like she wanted me to give her a bigger reaction, something she could justify. I started eating faster, leaving sooner, keeping my eyes down, and that seemed to disappoint her most of all. One evening, as I paid at the counter, she leaned in close and lowered her voice. "You know," she said, smiling, "some people should learn when they are not welcome." I met her eyes then, really looked at her. And for a brief moment, I saw something else there. Not confidence, not power, anticipation. That was when I realized this was not going to end on its own. And whatever came next was going to be worse. The breaking point did not arrive with shouting or tears. It arrived quietly, the way most permanent decisions do, disguised as an ordinary moment that suddenly carried too much weight. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind that left the sky bruised purple and the air heavy with the promise of rain. I had worked a double shift and my body felt hollowed out. My hands shook as I unlocked my apartment door, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes looked dull. My shoulders sagged like I had been carrying something invisible for far too long. I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed everything in my head. The locked door, the laughter, the way her voice followed me even after I left. I told myself again that I could stop going to the diner, that I could choose a different route home, a different place to eat. But the thought made my chest tighten, not with relief, but with something sharper. Why should I have to disappear to make someone else comfortable? That question settled deep and refused to leave. The next day, I passed the diner without stopping. The neon sign buzzed as usual, indifferent to my absence. I felt a strange pull in my stomach, a mix of fear and anger. Walking away felt like surrender. Walking in felt like stepping back into a trap. The conflict churned inside me all afternoon, growing heavier with every hour. That night, I dreamed I was standing in front of a locked door again. Only this time, no one laughed. No one spoke. I woke with my heart racing and my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The realization came slowly over the next few days, building piece by piece. She had chosen me because I was quiet, because I did not push back, because I looked like someone who would swallow discomfort rather than risk being labeled difficult. And every time I returned, I confirmed that assumption. I sat at my kitchen table one evening, a cold cup of tea untouched beside me, and felt something shift. Not rage, not panic, clarity. I stopped asking what I had done to deserve it. I started asking what I was willing to accept. The answer surprised me. I thought about all the moments I had let slide in my life. The meetings where my ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them. The friendships that took more than they gave. The apologies I never received. The pattern was painfully familiar. This diner was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection. That was when I understood this was no longer about soup or locked doors. It was about dignity. I went back the following evening. The bell rang as I entered, and the familiar tension wrapped around me like a second skin. She noticed immediately. Her smile flickered, then widened. She approached my table with exaggerated slowness, savoring the moment. "What will it be tonight?" she asked, her tone sweet enough to sting. I looked up at her and met her gaze without flinching. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. "Just water," I said. She rolled her eyes and walked away, shaking her head like I was an inconvenience she had already grown tired of. I sat there, hands folded, observing, watching how she moved, how she spoke to others, how easily she slipped between charm and cruelty. When the water came, I did not drink it. I watched the surface of the glass, the way the light reflected off it. I noticed how she hovered nearby, pretending to wipe the counter while keeping me in her peripheral vision. I understood then that confrontation would give her what she wanted. A scene, a story she could twist. I needed something else, something quieter, something that could not be laughed away. As I left, she called after me. "See you soon," she said, her voice carrying that same anticipation I had noticed before. I paused at the door, my hand resting on the handle. For the first time, the thought of it being locked did not scare me. It sharpened me. That night, I did not cry. I did not vent to friends. I did not rehearse arguments in my head. Instead, I opened my laptop and began writing everything down. Dates, times, exact words. Small details that had once felt insignificant. The more I wrote, the calmer I became. By the time I closed the laptop, my hands were steady. The fear that had lived in my chest for weeks had transformed into something deliberate and focused. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the next time I walked into that diner, it would not be as a victim. It would be as someone who had finally decided to stop absorbing the damage and start returning it. I did not rush the plan. I let it breathe. I let it grow teeth. The first thing I did was gather proof. Not dramatic proof. Not anything that would tip her off. It's just quiet, undeniable evidence collected one ordinary visit at a time. I returned to the diner on different days at different hours. I ordered small things. Water, soup, toast. I watched. I listened. I recorded. My phone stayed face down on the table, camera angled just enough to catch reflections in the chrome napkin holder. Her voice carried easily in that room. So did her laughter. So did the way she spoke about me when she thought I could not hear. "She is back again," she said one afternoon. "Must enjoy the attention." Another day she leaned toward a coworker and nodded in my direction. "She drops, do not touch her. Liability nightmare." Each word tightened something inside me, but I did not react. I smiled. I thanked her. I played the role she expected. Quiet, passive, forgettable. Behind that mask, I documented everything. I photographed receipts with incorrect charges. I saved timestamps. I noted which tables were seated when she mocked me out loud. I recorded the way she delayed my orders while others were served promptly. Patterns formed quickly once I started looking with intention. The next step required patience. I researched the diner, not the menu, the ownership, the reviews. The inspection records. It did not take long to find cracks beneath the greasy surface. Health complaints buried under years of ratings. Employee turnover. A manager known for avoiding conflict rather than addressing it. I did not move yet. I waited. Then came the night she crossed a line she could not step back from. The diner was crowded. Rain hammered the windows, blurring the streetlights outside. I took my usual booth. She saw me and smirked, already energized by the audience around her. When she brought my order, she leaned in close, her voice low. "You know," she said, "people like you love being victims." Something in her tone was different this time. Sharper, bolder, like she felt untouchable. I looked at her and said nothing. She straightened and addressed the room, her voice suddenly loud. "Do we need to call someone?" She looks pale again. Laughter erupted. Chairs scraped. Someone whistled. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed still. My phone recorded from my pocket, microphone catching every word. I stood slowly, letting the room quiet just enough. "Please unlock the door," I said. Her eyes widened for half a second. Then she laughed. Do not be dramatic. That was enough. I left without another word and stepped into the rain. My clothes soaked in seconds, my pulse roaring in my ears. The cold felt grounding, cleansing. I knew I had what I needed. The next morning, I sent emails. Not emotional ones, not angry ones. Precise, organized. Attachments labeled and time-stamped. One went to the diner owner. Another to the regional manager listed on their business registration. Another to the local health department. Another to a disability rights advocacy group. I had researched carefully. I did not exaggerate. I did not editorialize. I simply presented facts. Elated? 3 days later, I returned. The atmosphere inside the diner had shifted. Conversations were hushed. The manager hovered near the counter, eyes darting. She stood stiffly behind the register, her confidence dulled, her smile forced. When she saw me, her face drained of color. She approached my table slowly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yes," I said calmly. "I would like to speak with the owner." Her mouth opened, closed. She looked toward the back. The manager appeared seconds later, his posture rigid, his tone polite, in a way it had never been before. The owner arrived shortly after. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a tablet tucked under her arm. She did not sit. She stood beside the table and asked me to speak. So I did. I described the locked door, the comments, the receipts, recordings, the laughter. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I let silence do some of the work. The waitress tried to interrupt. The owner raised a hand without looking at her. "Is this true?" the owner asked. The room held its breath. And for the first time since this began, I saw fear replace anticipation in her eyes. The kind of fear that knows what comes next cannot be laughed away. The diner felt smaller in that moment, like the walls had inched closer to listen. The owner did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the waitress, tablet resting against her arm like a silent witness. The pause stretched long enough to make the room uncomfortable. Forks hovered midair. Conversations died out one by one. "Answer the question," the owner said. The waitress swallowed, her mouth open, then closed again. She laughed once, too loudly, too fast. "People exaggerate," she said, glancing around for support that did not come. "She has issues." We were joking. The owner turned to me. "Did you feel like it was a joke?" I felt every eye in the diner land on me. This time the attention did not shrink me. It steadied me. "No," I said. I felt trapped. The word landed heavily. Trapped. It echoed off the tiled floor and settled into the silence. The owner nodded slowly and turned back to the waitress. "You locked the door." The waitress shook her head too quickly. "Was for safety." She looked unwell. "We did not want a liability." I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. I pressed play. Her voice filled the diner, clear and unmistakable. "Promise you will not pass out. I do not want a scene." A murmur rolled through the room. Someone near the window whispered, "That is messed up." Another shook his head. The waitress stood frozen, color draining from her face. The owner listened without interrupting. When the recording ended, she did not speak right away. She scrolled through her tablet, reviewing the attachments I had sent days earlier. Receipts, dates, notes. Each flick of her finger felt like a nail sealing a lid. The manager tried to speak. "We were not aware of any of this." The owner raised a hand. "You should have been." She turned to the waitress again. "It's not an isolated incident," she said. "You have multiple complaints for harassment and discriminatory behavior. You charged customers incorrectly. You created an unsafe environment." The waitress looked around wildly, searching for someone to laugh with her. No one did. The men in suits stared at their plates. The regulars avoided her eyes. The room that once fed her cruelty now offered nothing. "This is unfair," she snapped, desperation cracking her voice. "She provoked me. She keeps coming back." The owner looked at her coolly. So do all paying customers? A beat passed? Then another. You are done here, the owner said. The words were simple. Final. The waitress blinked. What? Effective immediately, the owner continued. Turn in your apron. You will be escorted out. The sound that escaped the waitress then was not laughter. This was something smaller, thinner. She looked at me, her eyes sharp with hatred and something else I had not seen before. Fear. She took off the apron with shaking hands. The fabric slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. No one moved to help her. The manager stood rigid, avoiding her gaze as security appeared at the door. As she was led away, the door opened wide. Sunlight spilled in, bright and unforgiving. She hesitated on the threshold, glancing back at the room that had once protected her. No one looked back. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I exhaled. It felt like my lungs had been holding air for weeks. My shoulders loosened. My hands, for the first time in a long while, were steady. The noise of the diner returned slowly, cautiously, like life testing whether it was safe to resume. The owner turned to me. I am sorry, she said. This should never have happened. I nodded. The apology did not erase what had been done, but it mattered that it existed. That it was spoken out loud. She offered to comp my meal. I declined. I stood up, feeling taller than I had in months. As I walked toward the door, the same door that had once been locked against me, I paused. I rested my hand on the handle. It opened easily. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. The sky stretched wide above me, indifferent and free. I stood there for a moment, letting the sounds of traffic and distant voices wash over me. Justice did not arrive with applause. It arrived quietly, firmly, in the form of accountability. And as I walked away, I realized something else. The laughter that had once followed me had nowhere left to go. It had finally turned on itself. I did not go back to the diner after that day. Not because I was afraid, and not because the memory was too heavy, but because I no longer needed to prove anything to that place. It had served its purpose. It showed me who I was when I stopped shrinking. For a long time, I believed karma was something dramatic, loud, immediate. I imagined it as a sudden reversal, a public downfall that happened the moment someone did wrong. But what I learned is that karma works differently. It waits. It listens. And when it arrives, it does not need to announce itself. The waitress lost more than a job that day. She lost the protection of anonymity. She lost the comfort of believing her cruelty was invisible. She learned, in front of a room full of people, that power built on humiliation collapses the moment it is exposed. That lesson did not require my forgiveness, or it required my presence. I thought about her often in the weeks that followed, not with anger, but with clarity. I wondered how many people she had treated the same way. How many had walked out swallowing their discomfort because it seemed easier than speaking up. The thought no longer filled me with guilt. It filled me with resolve. What changed most was not the world around me. It was the way I carried myself through it. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped laughing off comments that cut deeper than they should. When someone crossed a line, I noticed it. I named it. And when necessary, I documented it. Quiet strength, I learned, is not passive. It is precise. There were moments when I questioned whether I had gone too far. Whether involving managers and owners and outside organizations was excessive. Those doubts did not last. Accountability is not cruelty. Silence is what allows cruelty to grow comfortable. I did not need to humiliate her the way she humiliated me. I did not need to shout or insult or embarrass her in return. I simply told the truth and let it stand where it belonged. That was enough. New beginnings rarely arrive with grand announcements. Mine came in small shifts. Choosing different routes home because I wanted to, not because I felt forced. Sitting straighter in meetings. Trusting my instincts when something felt wrong. Understanding that discomfort is not the price of peace. I learned that justice does not always look like revenge, but it should always feel like release. And it did. Some people will hear this story and say it was just a diner, it's just a waitress, just a bad day. But those people have never stood in a room where laughter wrapped itself around their fear. They have never felt the quiet terror of being trapped and treated like entertainment. If you have, then you understand why this mattered. I did not forgive her. Forgiveness was not required for healing. Boundaries were, action was, the truth was. And that truth followed me out of that diner and into every part of my life that came after. Because when you stop absorbing disrespect and start answering it with clarity, the world adjusts. It has to. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to show your support. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for yourself changed everything? Tell us your story and stay here for more powerful, truly life tales of justice and transformation.